Hello and welcome to another episode of Women to Know. If this is your first time joining with us, Women to Know is a video series in which I bring on amazing, wonderful, compassionate, talented women who have either lived through something and are willing to share their experience so that other women who are going through that same something can find hope and encouragement in the shared story. Or I bring on women who have phenomenal resources so that the women who are going through something can find some tangible ways and tools of moving through their experience. Today, my guest, So for me, I am Susan Trippier. I'm a women's empowerment coach. It's Friday, y'all, and so the brain is in that space. I am a women's empowerment coach and the host of the Women to Know video series. And my guest today is Ann Kaplan, who is a parent coach. I'm going to read you her incredible bio, and then we're going to jump right in, as we always do. Ann is a mother of 4 children and a parent coach based in Denver, Colorado. She has lived the dream and difficulty of parenting through every childhood stage, from infancy through adolescence. She understands not only the joys, but the difficulties and worries that come as a parent. Ann has a unique holistic approach to parent work that includes emotional support, home management skills, and effective discipline that empowers children while improving behavior. She coaches women through various stages of motherhood, from conception to the transition into their new motherhood role, to behavioral challenges, to starting a business with the kids in tow. Ann is someone who will give it to you straight and love you fiercely. And I love all of that. Welcome today. Thank you for being a guest on Women to Know.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Susan. I was thinking about myself when you were saying I either bring on guests who have lived through something and then you can know you're not alone, or they have these resources for you to go through whatever it is you're going through. And I was like, I kind of fit both of those.
And I love it, right? And for me, part of the joy that I get out of this experience and holding space. I am somebody who likes and values to hold space for others as a way of connection and learning. And I love listening to people's stories. There's no better way of just feeling, to me, more connected to another human being, more understood, seen, felt, validated than listening to the story of some, and then seeing myself in pieces of their story too. And so it's just a really powerful way of connecting and inspiring hope in others too. So thank you for being willing to share some
Yeah,
of
of course.
your story today. And so why don't let's first start with, how did you come into this space of
Mhm.
parent coaching? Because I think it's still a profession that is not nationally recognized as it needs to be. And so, the vital support and services that you provide. So share with us a little bit about how you ended up in this space.
Sure. Yeah, I would say the real way that I ended up here is because of the way that I was parented and the kind of dedication I had in my mind that I knew I wanted to do something differently, but didn't really know what that was or how that was possible even. And through my own work of kind of healing and educating myself and really being kind of a cycle breaker, or I at least try to be in my family. I met tons of other parents who needed the same kind of support. I thought so much about how I wish there had been someone that I didn't have to figure this out by myself. And, over time, I just realized like this is something that I could do for people and make a huge difference. And I'm now a Love and Logic independent facilitator and an IPEC certified life coach. And I kind of bring those two things together so I can give my clients not just the skills where it comes to discipline and responding to our children, but also the emotional support and that kind of healing work that needs to happen so that you can actually use those skills.
So before we get there,
Mhm.
Can you share with me some of what your childhood was like, what your experiences were like that not only informed you then, but also led to this commitment that you have articulated that, like, I knew I wanted to do some things differently.
Yeah. Well, I can say that my parents are both very angry people and they just have a very hard time communicating a whole lot more emotion than disappointment or anger. And so, I grew up in a house with lots and lots of yelling, hitting. The best you could get from my parents was a, sort of exasperated sigh. So, not a lot of the attunement that we know or I know now as a parenting professional is crucially important for kids. And so, I didn't, whatever we grew up with, we think that's normal, right? So I just thought, well, that's how it is, I guess. Every parent is just screaming at their kids all the time, and you're either like carefully tiptoeing around your parent or hiding from your parent. That just must be what it's like to be a kid, and screaming and yelling, that must just be what it's like to be a parent. And I always credit my aunt and uncle with like being sort of the seed that sparked this desire to explore other options. And it wasn't like they were the best parents in the world. Probably the stuff that I saw about them wasn't even the true whole picture of them, but I never, whenever we were together for family gatherings, I never saw them raise their voice to their kids. I never saw them hit their kids. And it was just this seed of like, wow, maybe there's like a different way to be that I don't know about yet. And then I went off to college and came home. Everyone has this experience. I think when you're the typical college student, you come home maybe like a couple months into college, usually it's for like Thanksgiving or something like that. And it's such a culture shock. It was for me, like after living by myself, even just for a few brief months, coming back home into my parents' universe and I didn't realize until I came home, like, oh my gosh, it's been months since I've heard someone screaming. I have been immersed in like civil behavior for months. And that just culture shock was it. I think watching other parents behave humanely to their children and then having the experience of what it's like to be away from anger and hatred and hateful behavior, that those two things came together. It was just like, that's it. A fire was lit inside me before I ever even had children, that someday I'm going to be a mom and it's not going down like this. And then of course I had kids and very quickly was like pushed to my limit and started behaving in ways that made me feel so ashamed of myself. And I remember having a conversation with my husband where I was like, oh my God, I'm turning into my mom. And maybe this is just what happens to you. Like you get pregnant, your hormones go crazy, and you all of a sudden, I was like, oh, I've never behaved this way in my entire life. And now I'm acting like this. And in some ways, it was great because I started having compassion for my mom of like, oh, maybe this is just what happens to you, and now it's happening to me. And before I decided like, wait a minute, no, I'm not going to do that, I spent some time being like, maybe I just need to reconcile myself to the fact that by choosing to be a mom, I also have chosen to be a person I don't want to be, but
Mm.
I don't have another choice. And it wasn't until maybe my first son was probably like a year and a half old, where I was just like, this is going very poorly. And I really refused to accept that like this is the only option, and kind of face the fact that like it's great to want to be different, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Like you just have to actually do something to be different. You don't just get to decide that.
Exactly. And before we kind of explore what that awareness process was for you and how you found the tools, inner and exterior, to move through that, I also just want to hold space to recognize that in our conversation, we are not throwing any shade or shame on your parents. I just want to hold space to recognize that people bring all of their some experiences into every event and life transition that happens. And there have been previous generations that were not as aware about things as the impact of trauma or the
Mhm.
storing of trauma, or just did not have the space to look to things like therapy or counseling, or because it was a different time and there were different expectations. And so I just want to share that we, from our perspective, from my perspective, recognize that your parents were in a loop, and they were in a loop, and they were doing the best that they could with the tools that they had and the self-awareness that they had. And in that, you were able to come to a place, having traveled outside of that dynamic, to then see some of the dynamics full on and recognize, no, there are some things here that I want to be a change maker. How did you describe yourself? As the generational disruptor, or what did you say?
Yeah, like a lot of my clients describe themselves as cycle breakers and
Cycle breakers. Yes. Yeah. And that takes oftentimes the investment of other people in your life who can speak in and model something different. And it often also takes an experience outside of the dynamic that gives distance from the
yeah,
dynamics that are there.
I totally agree. And it's a really important point to say, like, I think in the beginning, for a lot of my clients, what I see their journey, it does start with just processing all the emotions you have about your family of origin. And that does include anger, resentment, hurt, all of those things. And that's an important part of the process. It's just not the end destination. I like to tell my clients, like, let's try to make sure this is a pit stop
Yeah.
on your journey. You're not going to just like hang out here for the rest of your life. Because something that I realized as I became old, my kids got older, I became an older parent, I had more experiences under my belt, and I made more mistakes, was that because integrity is such a huge value of mine, I realized that I couldn't let myself off the hook unless I was willing to let my mom off the hook. Like, it wasn't fair in my mind. I couldn't hold her to a different standard than I held myself to. And I knew that being able to forgive myself and release shame around my mistakes was crucial to me growing as a parent that I wanted to be. But I got to a place where I'm like, this is as far as I can go in my own growth until I'm ready to let go of the perfection that my mom did not attain.
Mm.
Fell far short of, and all of those things. I will say that was definitely far along in my process, and a lot of people, perfectly understandably, are really not even ready to have that conversation yet when we first start working together. It's too far, it's not accessible to them to think about like forgiveness in the sense of that doesn't make it okay.
Yes.
Make it okay. It just means that you're ready to let go of carrying that. That's not ready. You might not be ready for that, and that's not a problem at all. It just, may be waiting for you in your future when you are ready for it. And I think the more we are ready to let that stuff go, the more our growth kind of skyrockets, really.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because the energy from which like we are living and centered in changes. It
Mm-hmm.
just, so which is part of when you're able to get to a place of release. Like, I've stopped using the word forgiveness because I recognize it's very emotionally triggering
Mm-hmm.
for some people, because of this connotation that forgiveness means all is okay and we're just forgetting about what happened moving forward, when that's the farthest thing from the truth. So
Right.
with some of my clients, I use the term releasing instead, and then the releasing of the anger, the sadness, the grief, the frustration, the unmet expectation, like all of it that we don't realize we're still holding we're still holding, it's right here and it's right under the surface. And then once we come to this place of release, it's like this huge weight has been lifted off of our body, and the energy just changes in terms of our focus, the expansion that starts happening, the opening that starts happening, the embrace and the movement forward. So a little off tangent there for a second, but so let me sort of pull it back here. For those women who are resonating with where you were those years ago and who are in that place right now, who are saying to themselves, I just feel like there's this tension between, I'm not really certain that this is the path and this is the right way, but maybe this is it. Maybe this just is it. And I was the one who was misunderstood all of those years. But there's still something inside them that is saying, no, there is a different way.
Sure.
Can you kind of talk to those women and share this, maybe some of the steps that you took to enter into that deeper self-awareness space and to take movement and action?
Yeah. I would say that for me, and this is kind of the thing that I try to fast track a little bit as much as it's realistic to for my clients. To me, my path to the parent I am now has been a very iterative process. And that will always be true, but I think the iterations don't have to take quite as long as they did with me. You know, I realized that I didn't like how I was responding to my son's behavior. He's a year and a half old. All the toddler things are starting to happen. You know, it's different than that first year of life where it's like, just keep him alive. You're nailing it. Right now, it's like, wait a minute, this kid is like hell bent on like putting every single thing in his mouth. Like, I swear to God, Elijah ate like 6 different kinds of poop in this first run. It was impossible. It seemed like he was hell bent on his own destruction. We had like a hearth around like a stone hearth around our fireplace. He just wanted to kill himself on that thing. I know it. And it was just driving me crazy. I was like maddening. Meanwhile, of course, I'm also pregnant with my second kid. So, you know, I'm screwed basically in terms of my energy level, my mood, you know, all this stuff. And I just realized that I was starting to yell at him. I was starting to repeat myself and bark at him. I was starting to like lose my temper and take it out on him. I was starting to take out on him stuff that wasn't even about him at all. Like, my husband didn't come home from work on time. Okay. Somehow that became Elijah's fault, right? Like, all of my emotions, I didn't know what to do with them, and I didn't know what to do differently. So in that time, I wasn't really thinking about, oh, how do I take care of my emotions? I was thinking about like, what am I supposed to do instead of yelling at him? I went into a pediatrician appointment where I literally was like, can I just spank him? Like, is that what I'm supposed to start doing? Like, I think it might be time to start spanking. And he's like, let's pump the brakes here. But I literally didn't know anything else. You know, it's like, all I remember from my childhood is yelling or spanking. I really never saw anything different than that. And I think I just had this Pollyanna idea in my head. I was like, well, if I'm not a jerk to my kid, then he'll be well behaved and listen to me, which is completely false, right? Falling for that, you know, fairy tale. Let me just dissuade you of that illusion right now. But you know, I didn't know anything else to do. Like, what do you do when your kids are quote unquote naughty and you don't want to yell and you don't want to repeat yourself and you've already told them? And I didn't know. I literally had never even heard of time out before. This is the childhood that I experienced. And so my approach at that time was, let me educate myself. And that's when I found out about Love and Logic. I am so good at learning new information and implementing it, just like a very good straight A student. So I followed that program like a lemming, and it worked really, really well. And I felt like, oh, phew, problem solved. To brush my hands off and go about my business. Now I'm best parent of all time. And that iteration lasted for way too long. Years probably, where I was like, I don't know what all y'all's problem is. I'm tight ship and my house is clean and I never, you know, I never lose my temper or whatever, which is I didn't realize that I was implementing love and logic with a little too much logic and a little not enough love. I thought, this is great. I've got my kids to behave. I know how to, get my kids to toe the line, and I never yell, and, I don't repeat myself. Mission accomplished. And it wasn't until longer down the line, like years later, probably actually by the time baby number 3 came along, that that was my limit. Like, I just literally couldn't anymore. I had a newborn, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And we had a dog at the time, and I was like, I can't, the dog has to go. We rehomed the dog. Like, now I think, like, well, that was awesome, because it pushed me to this breaking point where I couldn't just white knuckle it anymore, which is what I had. I didn't even realize it. And so then I realized, like, I need, like, help for me. I don't need somebody to tell me what is a good parent, what are the metrics, what do you do instead of yelling. I already learned all that stuff. I'm not doing it anymore because I'm losing my effing mind, but I know what those things are, so I don't need that. I need help so that I'm not losing my mind anymore. And that's when I started the journey of self-exploration, self-reflection, radical accountability, compassion for myself and other people, like the attunement that I was missing. This is why Love and Logic is called Love and Logic. It's because we know authoritative parenting is the gold standard in parenting, and that requires attunement to your child and boundaries that are enforced with calm empathy. Those are the 2 metrics, love and logic. If you're not really attuning to your child, if you're not actually connecting with them in a heart space, like, you might be doing all the stuff in the book, but you're not actually authoritatively parenting your kiddo. And who can blame you? The amount of work that we need to do on ourselves to truly be able to attune into our children is Herculean.
It is.
And we don't have the support. We never saw it. We never were taught it, and we're not getting help to do it now, because it's not just now, it's decades down the line, right? Like, we've been immersed in codependency and shame for decades. Now it's not just about being taught it. Like I said, I was taught it, but it's also about doing the healing and, like, unlearning and reparenting that allows us to actually truly be present and connected on that heart space level with our children. And, it's really fun and glorious to talk about that on podcast or video series or whatever. But in the moment, our kids' behavior does create emotion in us, and we don't really know what to do with that. We don't handle it very well, most of us, unless we do this deeper work. So that was kind of like that second iteration. Now, when I work with my clients, it's like, let's kind of have a parallel process here where you are learning skills, but we're also looking at this stuff now, not when you're about to lose your mind, or you might already be losing your mind, and that's just fine. You're in the right place.
So what you're touching on is so incredibly important. This process of pausing this, and I'm sorry, I don't know why my camera today is deciding to be all fuzzy and stuff, but just is what it is.
Glamour shot filters from the 90s. You look really, like, mysterious.
I'll own that right now. Thank you. The stepping into that space of holding space for yourself, of becoming more self-aware as a parent, hardest job in the world.
Yeah.
Hardest job. One day to the next can be night and day. And there is a ton, like the roller coaster of emotions, the expectations that are put on women in particular to be the super mom and super in all of the things, and having their act together and putting that, like, polished projection, or the projection of, like, the polished person. There are so many messages that women receive related to their identity as mother.
Absolutely.
That sometimes stepping into this space of digging deeper and uncovering feels very uncomfortable, Because then
Right.
we have to address all of this messaging that's going on here and the tension that that causes. Can you
That's totally
talk
true.
a little bit about to those moms right now who are listening and they're in that place where they just don't know how they're going to get through another day, right? Like, can you give a word to them about the importance of pausing, about
Yeah.
the importance of listening to yourself, like the unwinding and the unlearning?
Yeah. I think you're bringing up several really important points. Like one is like the baggage that we bring to parenthood isn't just from our childhood or just from our parents. It's from what we read in a book, what we see on TV, what some nosy lady at the grocery store said to you when you were pregnant, like everything.
Yeah.
And so it is a lot of confronting these preconceived notions we have, and confrontation is exhausting,
Yeah.
like you say. This process, like I said, I like to speed it up as much as is reasonable. Like it's not going to be a one and done thing. My clients work with me for a minimum of 6 months, and that's on purpose because it does take time. You will absolutely get, confrontation fatigue, for lack of a better word. You're going to need to take a pause. You're going to hit plateaus where, for whatever reason, it's what's needed is for you to just hang out where you're at right now. I have a client right now who's grown by leaps and bounds. And just recently, she has just come up against a brick wall for herself. And she's just hanging out, sitting in front of that brick wall, checking it out, and sitting there, maybe leaning up against a brick wall, taking a nap. She's not ready. And like little by little, and this has probably been going on for at least 2 months, little by little, she's having miniature realizations. She sometimes will do a check in and she's like, I'm just crying today. And I'm like, good, you're right where you need to be. This is not your forever place, but for right now, this is where you are. And that patience and trust that this isn't going to last forever, it is leading to something, is so profound. And I think that's one of the amazing things we do as coaches. It's very easy to forget as coaches that this is part of our work because, of course, as coaches, we want results for our clients. We want to watch them get where they want to go. And we want to feel like we're part of that ability that they have to get there. And it's easy to forget, especially when I first started out on this journey, feeling like, oh, maybe I'm not the best coach because this person is still struggling with this problem they had last week or whatever. And, now that I've been doing this for years and years, I'm like, oh, actually, what they really need from me is give them permission to pump the brakes because they have the same sense of urgency that I do. And if I bring that to this, we're all just going to be rushing towards some way where we can pacify ourselves by saying we're quote unquote done instead of actually responding to where we're at right now. And some of the best things I think I do as a coach is to just kind of, like you said, hold that space so that, this is the waiting space. You've read that Dr. Seuss book, all the places you'll go. And there's this whole part where you're like, and sometimes you'll just be waiting, you'll be in the waiting place. I'm like, it might be okay to be there for a little while. You're not going to stay there, but you might need to be there for now.
Yeah, there's lots of wonderful detangling and like
Mm-hmm.
encouraging rebuilding that happens during those waiting space moments.
Well, and I think like if you think about your own like inner journey as almost like this inner space that you have, when you go through a big growth spurt, you've created a new space that you're now living in. And it's important. Like you've just come, I'm doing this video in an Airbnb. What did I do when I first got here? I like walked around. I was like, okay, here's the bedroom. Oh, there is a washer. Yep. Okay, good. I like the shower, whatever. Like I didn't just like dump my stuff in the door and then go out for dinner. This is part of this. Like you've just created a new environment for you to occupy and a new space for you to take up. Do that.
Love it. Good words. Because we're so, I say this all the time, as somebody who is heavily focused on self-care and somatic practices, We are conditioned to be productivity based in this culture and move through things instantaneously. And that is not the case when you are in a reflective, thoughtful space. Yeah, change does take time.
Well, and I think also to continue this like space analogy, like also when you come into a new place, it takes a while for you to feel comfortable there and know how to
Yes.
take yourself in that space. Like I remember going through like a really intense EMDR process with my therapist like 10 years ago or something. And I described to her like the next time I saw her, I'm like, I feel like I'm like adrift right now. It's like I was on this crazy carousel and then I had this amazing breakthrough and I stepped off the carousel, but like everybody I know and love is still going around and around and around. And I feel like I don't know how to take care of myself now that it's like I'm on this path, that they're on that path. Like, how do I even navigate this? And if I had just like jumped off the carousel and then just booked it to the next whatever, I probably would have just had like a breakdown or something like that, or I would have jumped right back on the carousel is what would have probably happened because that's my safety safe. It's like the devil instead of the devil you don't, right?
Yeah.
Just hanging out and being like, I don't know what I'm doing right now. This is really scary and confusing and uncomfortable. Like that was really important for me to do.
And this is where working with a coach is so incredibly helpful because the perspective and the insight and the framework and the structure that a coach can bring to the client's lived experience is one that can offer that safe boundary around the unsettledness of transition and change. And so to that end, tell us, what is a parent coach? What do you do as a parent coach? And help us understand this incredibly valuable profession that needs to be broadcasted more into the world.
Totally. Yes, good question, because I think our conversation up until now has probably spent more time on that inner space piece and not so much on the, okay, well, what you actually do with your child. And that's kind of why I think my job is pretty special because it does bridge the gap between those two things. You can go to a therapist or, a general life coach or whatever and do a lot of that inner growth on your own, or not on your own, but separate from your parenting. And you can go ahead and take a parenting class or read parenting books and all that stuff. And that is also separate from your own inner growth. To work with someone like me is to decide that those things are inextricably linked. And so we're opening ourselves up to the idea that we're going to do both together and they're going to inform each other. And so a lot of what I do is this stuff we've just been talking about. Like, how do we break cycles? How do we break these generational chains and be disruptors in terms of the legacy of parenting that we've inherited? How do we actually parent on purpose instead of just the default that we've sort of like picked up along the way? That's part of it. And then there's a whole other parallel track that is like, well, okay, what do you do? Is timeout it? And what does a boundary look like? What actually is a consequence versus a punishment? What's a good consequence for your child? A consequence that means something to them, that makes sense for the behavior that they're doing, and that feels aligned with your values. It's not something you're just going to pick out of a a hat, you know? And so there's a lot of, well, let's figure out how we set boundaries with choice. Let's talk about how we can set boundaries without telling our kids what to do and give them directives. How can we, respond to dysregulation in ways that actually help our kids regulate, reinforce the fact that they have agency, but also take care of ourselves.
Yes.
All of those things are so important. And sometimes you really just need someone to say, these are the 3 steps. Like, so for example, when kids are coming to you with big emotions, I tell my clients all the time, 4 steps. This is a really tangible skill that all of your viewers or listeners could implement immediately. The 4 steps: a kid comes to you, so-and-so is being mean to me at school. I feel really depressed. I mean, when we've got teenagers, we might be talking about like, I'm cutting myself. It can real serious, or it can be like, I have hurt feelings because I didn't get invited to my friend's birthday party, or nobody sat with me on the friend's bench at recess. Whatever it is, big feelings, four things. The first is to validate their emotions and show empathy. So just say, that sounds really hard. I'm not surprised you feel that way. It makes perfect sense for you to feel that way. That's fair. I say that's fair a lot, especially to my older kids. The second is to hand the problem back to them. And this is one of the hardest things that parents have, because we fall into the codependent nonsense that we inherited, which is, oh, my child's suffering, that's my suffering. I can't stand the phrase, mother's only as happy as her saddest child. I want to find the person who made that up and do mean things to them. Oh, gross. Your child's journey is separate from yours. So in that second step, you hand the problem back to them with tons of love. Like, I can't wait to see how you solve this problem. Or if anyone can figure this out, it's you. Or what do you think you're going to do about that? Something that's not dismissive, but that shows like, this is actually your problem to solve. And then the third thing is to show confidence. So literally saying like, you're such a good problem solver. I've seen you do this before. I know you're really good at this, this, and this, whatever. And then the fourth thing is to make sure they know you're a resource. You could say, I have a few ideas. Let me know if you want to hear them. Or, I know you can figure this out on your own, but I'm here for you if you want it. Let me know if you want to brainstorm. I've got your back, basically. That's a completely different approach than most of us would default be doing. Most of us would probably say like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you didn't get invited to the birthday party, but you know what? It's okay, because we're going to go out get ice cream instead. Or, you know what? That person's a jerk anyway. Do you really want to go to someone's birthday party who didn't, you're like literally telling them how to feel and trying to take the problem away from them and trying to fix it or make it not a problem. That's so unhelpful, right? It's not teaching kids any life skills. It's not validating their emotions at all. So they're constantly getting the message like, you should not feel how you feel. But we don't realize that's what we're doing. We
Yep.
think we're being supportive. It's this unlearning that's so important. So when I work with my clients, they literally get a workbook from me that has both of those elements in it, that has a lot of journaling exercises. I like to trick my clients into journaling because everybody resists it, including me. I refuse to sit in front of a blank piece of paper. That is not how I work. So I don't do it either. So half the stuff in that workbook is like answering questions. Sneak attacked you with journaling. But the questions are questions that are about like, what do you think your job is as a parent? And do you want to come up with a different job description for yourself that maybe serves you and your family better? So lots of stuff that's about shifting the mindset and doing that healing and unlearning and reparenting. And then the other half of the workbook is those parenting skills, like literally this 4-step process. There's a whole section in there about kids' big emotions, sibling dynamics, meal times, bedtime, routine, like how to get to school in the morning without gouging each other's eyes out. These are real things. Like, it has to be boots on the ground or it's just esoteric nonsense. And I get complaints all the time from my clients who have already done things like reading books about conscious parenting, following all these amazing parenting gurus and Dan Siegel and all of his like amazing, right? They're all geniuses and they're pioneers in these concepts, but they leave after reading these books feeling like, okay, so what do I do? Like, it's not as easy as just saying, oh, attune to your child, connect with them in the heart space. What the heck does that mean?
Yeah.
And by the way, like, my life is actually real. Like, I really have laundry. I really have work. I really have a sick kid. I really have a mother-in-law. I really, really, really need to know what to really, really, really do.
The tangibles, give me the tangibles right now. Right, because that de-escalates the situation and all of the mind drama stuff that starts to kick in around, I'm a crappy parent, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a this, and all those stories that we tell ourselves.
I think a lot of that starts with, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. And how from one child to the next, what to do can look radically different.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I hear that from clients all the time. So I run a group coaching program for moms, and then I also do private coaching. And I hear a lot of times like, well, I really want to be in your group. That's my price point. That's the offering that the stuff that you offer in that group program is exactly what I need. But I don't think it's really going to work for me because my kid is different, or I'm different, or my situation is different. And it's like, yeah, your stuff is different, and that's not a problem because I teach you not only these skills, but then I help you figure out like, well, how do I want to apply that to my situation? How's it going to work for me? I'm a single parent. So this whole like every other day I get a break because my partner's taking care of my kid. Well, that's not going to work for me. Okay, well, let's figure out what's a different thing that's going to work for you. Or yeah, I like this whole like special way of handling dysregulation, but this part feels really uncomfortable to me. Okay, great. Let's figure out how to apply these same concepts in a way that gels with who you are. And that is absolutely how even the group program works, because a one size fits all approach does not work for anybody.
No. And that may have been what parents were taught like 2 generations ago, but in reality, it's no longer, I think, a viable option when you take into consideration personalities, emotional states, sometimes neurological condition, like the whole scope and range of everything. So it's
It's the reason why people
beautiful.
aren't reading that Dr. Spock stuff anymore.
Right? Like some of this, it's like, how do we just toss this out, never to return?
I
Um,
always hear like, oh, kids don't come with an owner's manual. Well, yes, they do. They are the owner's manual. You don't need anything out extra in terms of attunement and stuff like that. The only thing extra that we need is our skill set and our own ability to respond to what our kids are teaching us as their own walking owner's manuals. And that's why people like me exist.
mhm. And there's 2 things I want to touch on before we end our time, and I can't believe it's already been like a half an hour. One thing that I would love to get your thoughts on is this in the co-parenting space, and this is something we've touched on before we jumped into our live here. A portion of women that I work with are women who are going through a divorce. And so
Yeah.
a portion of the listeners here are women who are trying to figure out this parenting thing post divorce. And in particular, those women who are coming out of high conflict and or coercively controlled relationships in one dynamic or many,
Mm-hmm.
now trying to figure out how to implement this court approved parenting agreement
Sure.
with their ex. Can you
Right.
first, before we go there, can you share some of the benefits of co-parenting versus parallel parenting? In particular, because I think parallel parenting is something that still many people are not aware of, or aware that it can be a viable option in a high conflict situation.
Yeah. So I would say co-parenting, the difference between parallel versus co-parenting, in a nutshell, is that in a co-parenting relationship, both parents are communicating and cooperating with each other to some degree. That doesn't mean they agree about everything. It doesn't mean that they are like completely, on the same page all the time, but they are essentially teaming. They're a team in parenting their kids. Honestly, you're co-parenting if you're still married, right? Two parents teaming up to parent their children. And I would also say that there are some married couples who are parallel parenting. Parallel parenting is much more like the communication really isn't super healthy. There isn't a lot of agreement, and there's not a lot of cooperation at all, and in some cases none. In some cases, parallel parenting happens where the parents don't even speak with each other. There's an intermediary. There are lots of different ways that that can look, and I feel like that's a spectrum for sure. So, of course, it's easy for us to say, oh, co-parenting would be better. Obviously, it would be so much better to have this cooperation and everybody be on the same page and blah, blah, blah. To me, it's almost a moot discussion to say, well, which is better? because what we really need to say is which is possible.
Mhm.
And for a lot of parents, even ones who have the vision of ultimately co-parenting in the beginning, parallel parenting might actually be the healthier choice at first. There's a lot of healing and healthy boundaries and things that need to be set up, especially in the case where you're describing where one parent was kind of in a coercive relationship with the other. There's a lot of healing and boundary setting and confidence building and all of that stuff that needs to happen, because what really is important, and this is true no matter what relationship we're talking about, a co-parenting relationship, a parallel parenting relationship, a parent-child relationship, the a relationship is only as healthy as the boundaries within it. And so almost all of my clients have a row to hoe when it comes to getting better at boundaries. We all have that work to do. We've used boundaries in the past in unhealthy ways. We've not held boundaries in the past for unhealthy reasons. And learning how to really stand and have boundaries without the emotional intensity, without the coercion, without the shame, without the fingers crossing that it's going to make the other person do what we want them to do, that's really like a whole new ball game
Mhm.
for almost everybody, whether you're going through a divorce or not. And so I think what's most important with the clients I work with who are going through divorce, and I work with both parents sometimes, I work with one parent, it looks all different kinds of ways. Um, but I think the most important thing in the beginning is grace, that space that you were talking about, Susan, of this is where we're at right now. This is where I'm at right now. And maybe it's not where I want to be, but I also have to accept that this is my truth in this moment. And that's not a problem. It's just the truth. And what are my options and what do I see available to me in this place that I'm in right now? So grace is just huge there. And then the second is that skill building, just like we were talking about the two parallel tracks, right? Like, let's experiment with you setting boundaries with your ex. Wow, I have never done it this way before. This is scaring the crap out of me. What if he gets really angry? Okay, yeah, what if he does get angry? Let's talk about that. It probably is going to happen. Most people don't really love coming up against boundaries, especially someone who's been domineering, coercive in the past. So let's talk about why that's scary. What can you do to take care of yourself when you feel that? All of those things. So, I think giving yourself permission to do what's actually in your power to do, meaning not just like what your options are, but what is actually doable for you right now, is huge.
Love that. Thank you. And just with like the calm assurance that you share is
Mhm.
going to allow so many women listening to this to receive for that, all of that, those nuggets of goodness. Thank you. Because it is hard. It's hard work. Um,
I always say when somebody depending on how receptive I know they'll be to this comment, but when people tell me they're getting divorced, even if it's a friend, not a client or something, I always say my condolences and congratulations, because it is really, really hard, and you want to be super. I mean, you need compassion. You need compassion for the people around you. You need compassion for yourself. Like, it is hard. It's a life transition, even if you really, really want it and you're super happy about it. It's still going to be hard, right? Because it's something completely new. But on the other hand, no matter how hard the situation is, it is the beginning of a whole new chapter, a whole new level of yourself. Like, it's an amazing opportunity. And, of course, easy for us to say from the cheap seats when we're not actually going through it in this moment. But, I think it's really helpful to have someone in your life who, not in a toxic positivity way, but is able to look at that and say, like, there's a lot on the table here for us. Let's explore this. How do you want to come through this situation? And let me support you in doing that.
so speaking of exploring, you have something coming up soon that I want to make sure we get in here before our time closes. So share with us what you have coming up, the purpose of it, and how people can connect with you around it.
Totally. Yeah, so I do workshops every now and again. I haven't actually done one for over a year, so I'm really excited because coming up the Sunday and Monday, March 5th and 6th, you have a chance to attend my Parenting Revolution workshop. So you get to pick whichever day and time works best for you. And this is a workshop that's all about all the concepts we've really been talking about today, these like breaking generational cycles, parenting on purpose, and breaking away from your default, deciding where you need to level up and how you're going to do that. And really talking about not just the emotional piece that we've talked about of like, I know I want to do this, but I don't know how. It's not enough to just say I'm going to be different. I actually have to figure out how to be different. That's part of it, but we're also going to talk about these tangible, like, oh, how do you do this? What does compassionate boundaries even mean? What does a consequence mean? All of those things. And I love when I do workshops, I really try to keep it as interactive as possible. I like to have these moments for live coaching. I always save time at the end for Q&A, and you'll have a chance on that workshop to ask me your questions live, but also to sign up for a free one-on-one session with me where we can talk about what you want and what that looks like and how you can get there, and discuss the option of working with me further. So it's just a really great opportunity to get so much support, and it's free. So it's kind of like, I honestly don't know why you wouldn't take advantage of it. Definitely check it out. Definitely sign up. What do you have to lose? It's going to be an hour of fabulous information, no matter where you go with it afterwards. And you
And
can
is it
totally,
virtual?
yep, it's all virtual. So you can log in your PJs and with your kid crawling all over your head. Although I always say the more tuned in and uninterrupted you can be, the better. But with parents, it's always a spectrum of like, well, how tuned in can I be? And there'll be a replay too. Although once again, I always say come live, because that's when you can actually ask me your questions and get your answers, even if it's just typing it in the chat field and all of that stuff. So I like to run my workshops. They're very much like a round table. It's not just me as a talking head the whole time. Like, you'll see everyone on the Zoom. It'll be like the Brady Bunch, and we're all just like loving on each other and having really amazing high level conversations about parenting.
Love it. And so for those women who are listening to this, who are like, I need to connect with Anne, where can they find you?
Yes, the easiest way to find me is to just go to my website, which is AnnKaplanParentCoach.com. And information about the workshop will be there. Also, it'll just pop up right there, so you don't have to go search around for it, but you can find everything on there. You can find links to my blog, links to set up a discovery call with me, all the cool, fun stuff. Oh, and my free guide is there too, which is a little workbook that helps you. It's called Getting Your Kids to Listen the First Time. And it takes all of these like concepts, these parenting concepts, and applies it to this one tangible challenge that we all struggle with like repeating ourselves, all that good stuff.
Love it. And so all of Anne's information will be in the caption below too, all the spaces and places that you can find her. I highly recommend that you all sign up for Anne's workshop coming up in early March. And so, Anne, thank you so much, not only for sharing pieces of your story, your journey, your experience, but also your passion, and your compassion and your encouragement for women who are journeying through all the things related to this identity as mother.
Yes.
It's a lot to unpack, and it is exciting when it's aligned and it's authentic. And that's
right.
exactly what you are through your systems and your method and your framework. You're holding space for all of that. You're holding space for the heart centered. You're holding space for the logic. You're holding space for the connection and the mom as the connector in the family. And so thank you for the work that you do. It is so incredibly important.
Oh, thank you, Susan. That was so sweet.
I have had such a pleasure chatting with you today. And so thank you for being a guest.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.